My name is Nick Lebron. My earliest memories of the library, I have two in particular. One was with my mom. She would take me to the downtown library, and on the weekends, there was a prominent Hartford person. I think she's a legend now, but she would tell stories at the library. And coupled with those stories, I remember one event in particular where we had cookies with the story, and we were able to build on the cookies with frosting and sprinkles. And I just remember that being such a fun time because I never decorated a cookie, but it went along with the story. I don't remember the story. I remember the cookie. And they were just good times. I would imagine back then for my mother being a single mom at the time, trying to come up in Hartford, she valued education. And so these things were free things. And so I remember that very fondly. The second one was on my dad's side. My father was in and out of incarceration, so on the weekends I would spend time with my dad's side of the family. And my Aunt Dolly, she was younger, so she was in her teens when I was maybe 5 or 6, and we were in Bellevue Square, Building 1. And so, again, another free experience. There was a Sands library right there, and we would always get library books, and I would come back and read to my Aunt Dolly, who's no longer with us, rest in peace. We lost her last year. The library allowed influential people to influence me. At least for my mom, it wasn't so much about the cookie. It was about the experience and being a part of the children's library. And I just remember being in that ring. We would go upstairs. It was on the second floor, which I never understood that. Like, why would you put the kids and families having to walk up 2 flights of stairs? I just remember having to walk up the stairs and not wanting to. But I remember that children's library so fondly that I had the sections memorized. It's funny, the library was darker, but it brought light for me. And I remember phases of my life, like late 80s, early 90s, and then also the evolution of my life. I had that phase where I was into monsters, and they had the monster books. So they had the Frankenstein books, the Dracula books, and I was really fascinated to that. And there was this collection of those. There were like 10 of them, and I had to make sure I read all 10. And I would go back and be like, oh, somebody took it out or whatever. And then I had a phase, I think a lot of us had dinosaur phase, that 6 to 7-year-old range. And then I began to get the stars and the moons and the space. I remember really engaging with those things. And then when I became a preteen, I was really into like the mystery books and solving books. I remember the books where you would get to a section in the page and it'd be like, okay, if I am about to fall in the water, if you're going to use a kite, go to page 36. If you want to just dive in the water, go to page 63. And I just remember being like, oh, I get a choice in a book. And then I would go to 63, and then I'd be like, oh, I made the wrong choice. Let me go back. And I just had so much fun engaging with literature in that time. So in my formative years, it was tremendously impactful. It gave me a love of knowledge that I don't understand until I'm older. But it just gave me a love and a connection to things that weren't typically around me. My life is typical of a traditional experience for a Latino male in Hartford, where we have a lot of social determinants of health, a lot of risk factors. And so it provided me with that educational oasis and the ability to escape mentally beyond the TV. TVs did exist at that time, but it's not what we know now. And also TVs during that time were very expensive to have a cable service and have a TV. And if you did have it, then the adults normally dominated the TV. So you needed those things. And so that was the tremendous impact it had during my formative years. So I think the library impacted me as a teenager, and my story is a little bit unique, and this is where it kind of turns left from the traditional pathway, at least as we understand it. I was a teenage father, and I had 3 kids by the time I was 19 years old. And so when you talk about teenage years, I didn't have that traditional teenage experience. I got thrust into adulthood very early, but it was impactful for me at that time because I knew what the library brought me. And so I wanted to bring it to my children. So my children were exposed to the library, and I did that for them, and we would take trips to the library. And at the time, I remember the transition where you could rent videos and movies and take them home. And meanwhile, everybody paying for Blockbuster, I get it free, and I get it for 2 weeks instead of 3 days, and didn't have to pay. And then you get it good with the librarian, and you're like, hey, listen, when is I going to drop this or whatever? And so then you can influence that they purchase. I wanted to bring the library experience to them curriculum as well. So that's what meant the most for me in terms of my children, but I was still trying to educate myself. What is a reminder for me, though, is that's when the internet came out, mid-90s. And so the internet was available at the libraries in small doses. It wasn't like I walk in here now. We're in Trinity College right now. I already probably seen like 50 computers just walking here. There was one singular place, and you had to wait and you had to sign up. But that was the place where you would get research. And so although I had children, I was still trying to go to school and educate myself. It was either microfiche or I tried to go online. And I just remember the keywords. The keywords were so important at that time in order to find what you wanted. And so those were my memories. Number one, I would say as a teen was being a teenage father and using the library as an opportunity to teach my children. And number two was my own research project, and the ability to navigate and access to the internet was vital for my own research purposes. When I went to Capital Community College, I would love going to the library. It provided me an oasis. It's one of those things that my wife, she would understand, like, okay, let me leave him alone and she'll take the kids and I'll just absorb in the library. As I think back fondly, it was therapeutic because it allowed me to almost go back to my childhood now that I'm thinking about it, because I just engaged in the research, and whatever I was in, I was absorbed in it. With my development as a individual and as a person, and I remember just going on these tangents. Like, I stumbled upon the term prison industrial complex. I knew what I wanted to say. I had a 5-page paper at Capital Community College, certainly with 3 to 5 pages, and I knew what I wanted to say. I wanted to say we're overly incarcerated, but I didn't know what I was trying to say. Mass incarceration, these terms that we know now. But what I did know is that all my uncles and my dad and everybody was locked up. And I knew that, and I felt that, and it impacted me, and I wanted to say that story. For me, I would just vibe with whatever librarian was there. And this librarian was like, "Oh, young man, you talking about the prison industrial complex?" I was like, "No, I'm not talking about construction. I'm not talking about the building of the jails," although that makes sense, vibing with her. And it just blew my mind, like understanding prison as an industry. And again, it was just me wanting to explore. And then she was like, "You want to read this section and this section?" So just absolute fond memories. You know, I came up in a time where there was gang wars. I have friends being killed because they were wearing the wrong colors. And so that was hard for me because I was a Patriots fan and I couldn't wear red and blue. And I was a Celtics fan and I couldn't wear green and black. And it's like, damn. So I had to wear like neutral colors. I just had to buy gray. Everything was gray. That was my experience. But I think now what I taught my kids was the struggles that I had, at least for my kids, and I'm blessed. My kids are successful young adults, and it was something that hit home. And I think the generation that were teenage parents during my time have just articulated and educated their children. So I would say that that's a step in the right direction. So the advice I would give to young people about the importance of libraries, I'll start with a statement that I learned from a very close friend of mine who calls it the Poor People's University. And that is profound for me in its impact because not everyone can pay for university. So as I'm walking here on the Trinity College campus, you see the industry that colleges bring. So I see some construction going on. There's True Green going on. There's people mowing the lawn. There were athletes practicing on a field that was just reconstructed. So you see the business of the university around it, and all of that costs money, right? And I'm a graduate here of Trinity. I'm a proud graduate. This is my educational home. I feel safe here in terms of expressing myself, and Trinity College blessed me with that. But I'm not particularly sure folks have access to that. And if you think about the library as your own university, well, yeah, you may not end up with like a certificate or a degree, but who cares? You could end up with whatever knowledge. You can be versed in science. You can be versed in whatever industry. And I would say it's unique because everyone could type on a keyboard and Google search, but people don't go past the first page. So the content that you're being provided, it's still being spoon-fed to you. You think you're independent and typing and think you're getting stuff because you put keywords, but they screen it for you, right? And people are paying money to grab your attention on that first go on Google. Now, here's an opportunity where you can go and gain knowledge in a direction that no one has. And that path is tremendously unique to yourselves and to your own passion. And you could pick up a book and be like, yo, you know what? I don't like this author. Oh, everybody says they like this author on research of XYZ. But you know what? I don't like that viewpoint. And let me go pick up something else. What does somebody else say? And that's unique to your own lens, and it helps you develop your own spirit, your own energy, your own thought process, but it's an informed one, and no one can take that from you. What advice I would give a 10-year-old Nick? I think the 10-year-old Nick, as it pertains to libraries, is when you become a councilman, 10-year-old Nick, is to understand the politics behind the scenes of libraries and the importance of influencing them and the resources provided for libraries beyond just cutting a check from the city. I think that for the 10-year-old Nick is understanding, maybe engaging more in the libraries. I would tell a 10-year-old Nick to just pause and take a breath and appreciate the library outside the library. Oftentimes, I had to be in the library in order to appreciate the library, but to understand its impact outside and take whatever I learned inside and bring it outside and share it. It provided me a safe space, right? So it's almost selfish in that way. I would tell a 10-year-old Nick not to be selfish with the library. And I would say, open that bridge and let that safe space come out because you never know who you could impact. So I think the impact that the library's had on my life as an educator, A, and then B, as a public servant. I'm coming here fresh off of teaching. I just came out of a class at Milner in the north end of Hartford, teaching some young men who are struggling about masculinity and the inputs of masculinity through their various cultures, their race and ethnicity, and through all the social inputs that they get and how that shapes them. And you're talking about young men who are 13 and 14 years old, who you see they're at the crossroads in their life. Like they're still silly and they like Dragon Ball Z, but then they go out to the street and they see somebody get shot. It's very dramatic for them. And so what the library provided for me is the ability to tell them with confidence that their viewpoints aren't wrong, that it's okay that you're looking at the same thing and you're looking at it differently. And you're not wrong, because even though I was going to school and I was getting taught like Christopher Columbus is this wonderful, amazing human being, on the other end, I was reading stuff that wasn't happening in real time. And then also as I further educated myself. And if you don't have that conviction that there's a educational spectrum on every single topic, then you become very constricted in what you're able to provide as an educator. So as I'm speaking to these young men, they all have different viewpoints, and none of them are wrong. None of them are wrong. They're all based on some reality of something. Their parents are teaching them something based upon what they learned. But the issue is, going back to my story of finding what the right word is to term it, right? Prison industrial complex. And so as I'm talking about masculinity with these young men, people are scared to dive into these hard topics. They're afraid because of political correctness or whatever. Understanding that there's different viewpoints, and what political correctness is normative understandings of a spectrum where a broad mass of people are in that normative understanding, but understand that everything that has impacted this world has been outside normative understandings of reality. But what I want to add in a shout out is librarians are gangsters. And gangsters in the term that I'm using the word gangster, and that what we think triple OG with the street connotation hip hop, think about it. Librarians are the ones that are pushing for these social revolutionary thoughts, right? Librarians want that in the library. They're looking at normative society or the social constructs of society and say, bump that, we need this too. That's gangster, because they're saying the people need to know more than what you're providing us. That's revolutionary. Librarians are gangsters. And you may not see it because there's an archetype of librarians. I'm not going to say stereotype, but they're an archetype. A beautiful archetype nonetheless. Like you look at someone and you say, okay, they're probably a librarian. But inside, they're gangster. Access is important to me as a value because access is everything. Access is the influence. Access is the ability to overcome obstacles. Access is the ability to be able to navigate your own journey. Access is the ability to engage in worlds and theories and thoughts that is not constricted in what people place values on. You know, I just came from a school teaching kids where I was telling them that you're not giving a wrong answer. And they're like blown away by that because they're in a day where they're told their answers are wrong and right. If you think about it, the concept, like something as simple, is the sky blue? It's not. And everybody like, oh my God, the sky's not blue? And look, the only reason I know that is because from some kind of knowledge that I built from somewhere, I understand that the human eyes cannot pick up the real color of what the sky is. It's the reflection of the sea. It is perspective. Of course it is. We as individuals, whether it be gender, whether it be race, whether it be construct, whether it be culture, whether it be ethnicity, whether it be height, I come energized from teaching that class because these young men who supposedly are struggling in school for whatever reasons, they still were very thoughtful. And these are kids with the highest of risk factors. When you talk about the area Milner, that is arguably the poorest in Hartford in terms of whatever demographics you want to look at. You generally associate poverty with, I don't know if it's a causation, but a correlation between poverty and this concept of education and success in it. And these young men, I'm like, whatever grades they get in, it's just because the system is giving them that grades, because these young men were very thoughtful, and I believe they're inspired. Literacy is a gift. The ability to engage in reading and the concept of reading and being informed allows you to process in your own individual way. I think about literacy and not being able to read, and people in my life, I'm not going to call them out, but their inability to read and how they went about their life. And they made excuses of why they couldn't read. So, for example, if there was us 3 people in the room and that one person, and we were all given a form out to fill out, that person would be like, oh, I forgot my glasses. So that way we could help him or her with it. And me not understanding it as a 10-year-old Nick and say, oh, your glasses are in your pocket. And then I get a smack across the head later, like the limitations that causes people. And I think that literacy is, it's a gift. I'll just leave it at that. Well, I think it's like every topic that we talked about now, the drug trade, the prisons, the economics, all of that exists in books in the library. And that's why it's important for our community. Whatever you can think of, it exists in the library. You have to find it. And I think as a society, we're so accustomed to a microwave approach, like, okay, I want this information, let me get it like this. Yeah, it might take a little bit of work, but I think that work is worth it. The knowledge is in the work. The values of libraries to newer American citizens or people who are looking to be citizens and the citizens that are already here, and the disconnect in terms of the usage of libraries and why that's a problem. Well, let me just say this. I do have to get political, and that's what I campaigned on. I believe that the libraries have the potential of being a social service agency. They are already, so why not bring the services there? And so when I campaigned, I talk about these one-stop shops where you can go in and get your services or access to services. And the libraries are doing it. They're just not doing it in that profound way. And so you start to see these systems that start to begin to grow, but grow outside themselves. And systems themselves have a tendency to try to survive on their own. And so as an administrator and as a government, you have to understand that. And you don't want people working on the same thing in 2 different isolations. So why not merge them? And the only way to do that is you need leadership to say, we need to collaborate here. We don't need to compete against each other. How do we collaborate? Because they are providing those direct services. And I think that is the way to try to engage people. You got to get them in the door, right? And then once you get them in the door, then it's up to you or the services or the people that are behind the desk to connect them further to all of the knowledge that is behind them. I had different librarians in my life. A shout out to Anwar, a retired librarian who was influential in my life. You know, he gave me my first summer job at the library and allowed me to be in charge. Here I am, this 17-year-old with, I don't know if I had 2 kids at the time, maybe 1, but I know I was a teenage father. And the Albany Avenue Library just got 4 computers with internet. This was a big deal, man. It made papers, ribbon cuttings, 4 computers. And I was in charge of them at 17. And I felt so empowered because here I am making minimum wage, teenage father, all of these things. And Anwar saw something in me. He's like, no, you can handle this. There were lines of people. I had to create systems, wait lists. We used compact discs. And so then I had to create a policy because people were using compact discs to steal our program. They would download the program on the disc to then take the computer game home. But Anwar trusted that in me. And so through the librarian, he was gangster. I was at Capital Community College. I had graduated from Hartford High, and I had realized that I wanted more. The motivation was to provide for my children. And so I realized that the areas where I would be able to do this would be through education and obtaining a job that way. So I went back to Capital Community College, and there were professors that I fell in love with, and I like to say educationally, and they fell in love with me educationally, and they saw something in me. There were 2 professors, Dr. Josiah. He was relentless with me. There were times I would write papers and he would like, I'm not accepting this, Nick, this C-level work. And I'm like, dude, do you understand? Like a C, I'll take that all day. He's like, no. I'm like, but I got kids and I'm working. He's like, no, you got to do better. And him seeing something in me. And then there was another professor. This was the biggest challenge for me. Fran Downey. At the time, he was one of the only professors of African American studies in the country, and he had a doctorate. He challenged us. First day at Capital Community College, he says, I'm teaching at 2 schools right now. One here is Capital Community College. The other one is Yale. And he said, guess what? This syllabus is the same for both schools. I said, oh, he challenging me? I got an A+ in that class. How else could I know that I can hang with the elite institutions and the elite minds in the world? That was my only opportunity. That was my window, but not a window to the world, a window to myself to say, hey, listen, I can hang. And I got an A+ in that class, and Fran Downey saw that. And then I met Denise Best, and she was in the IDP program, and the rest is history. She got me into Trinity College, and I got my bachelor's and master's here. The evolution of my professional journey led me to politics. So my mama was a social worker. I grew up in a social work home, so I did social work, then I did family therapy. And then I started to do community organizing, because then you start understanding in social work that even though you're doing this case management or this family therapy with this one individual or this one family, a lot of the issues that they're having are poverty-related issues. Access to resources. And so, you're writing up their treatment goals, and a lot of their treatment goals are based upon that they're being evicted because they lost their job, like poverty-related issues. So then I understand as a growth, we need to create systems change. And so then I became an organizer. Then I became an advocate. Then I was like, okay, well, education is the way. So then I became a lobbyist. And through all of those systems, what I kept fighting, what ended up being the answer is some law, some ordinance needed to be changed. And so here I was talking to elected officials, asking them to make the changes. And the evolution of it was, well, let me be on the other side of that table and be the elected officials and create the change. And that's what brought me into politics. The best piece of advice I ever received and why it has stuck to me, I think it changes on the day. And I think it's okay for me to say that because we're human beings. So I think the best advice for today would be the influence of the Poor People's University statement. It was such a profound statement. And we're talking about the library now. And I think it's very fitting because sometimes you influence people or impact people, you're unaware. That's number one. And I think number two, we always should be operating that way. One of my first supervisors when I began in social work, and she said, be careful because you may be entertaining angels unaware. And so that's the advice I would give. That's my advice today. The role the library played in my evolution as a public servant is that it's the foundation. And it created a foundation that was built on stone and bricks and not sand. I think a lot of the internet knowledge, and again, I don't want to be this old man bashing the internet, but I think a lot of that knowledge is sand. When you start to build upon a foundation of sand, eventually it will erode because all you need to do is just break down one of those foundational pieces and it's gone. And everything that you built on top of it, it's a house of cards. So the library provided me my foundation, and I've built everything on that with the conviction that I read this in a book somewhere. And I didn't just make this up because I wanted clicks or likes. I read this. I put in that work. The library and its history and how it resonates with me. I can't help but think, Chris, because you mentioned how in 1774 it would have been outlawed for you to read. And I think about me and the way I look now and want to ask you, would I have been allowed to read? I may have. And I say that because my family, my grandfather was a black man with green eyes, but straight hair. He was 6'4". I can't help but think of myself and how I would have saw an obstacle and would have tried to overcome it somehow by being slick, somehow like maybe dressing and wearing the 1774 Jordans of that time, you know what I mean? And then that way that gets me in, you know? But anyway, I think about the profoundness of what the library in the 250 years and what it has provided for the community. And I think about what the next 250 years look like. And I think about the importance of political people and influential people understanding its importance. Sometimes I used to advocate for the library, and if you're standing on the soapbox and nobody's around you, then you're just speaking to yourself. And so we need to galvanize influential people and elected officials and anyone who has influence to talk about the library's importance and the future of what the library can potentially mean. And sometimes we get stuck in a concept of what it's supposed to be. But I think what we need to focus on what it should be or what it can be. And it should be fluid in its innovation and its thoughts, because when things become static, they become dry and they go away. I think we're at that evolutionary point in the library where it may need to reinvent itself with the proliferation of the internet and be able to stand on a place where understanding the world as it is, but with a plan for growth. And I'm happy to say that Hartford has always been the leader, one of the oldest library institutions in America. So why not be the most revolutionary? As much as librarians are gangsters, I believe you get stuck in being that gangster. You get stuck in that role. And quoting Nietzsche, be careful when you look into the abyss, because the abyss also looks into you. And so they're getting caught in the system and fighting for the systems as is, and it has to come organically from within. So someone from within that industry, or some systems or some people, a collective movement, need to be birthed out of that industry, because the answers aren't going to come from the politicians or the influential people. The answers have to come organically from within to then influence those people, show them that's importance. And so I think that the innovation and the potential for the future should come from the people that know it the best. And that's those gangster librarians. A favorite book from the library that I remember. Oh, yes. Stacey Abrams, her first book, Our Time Is Now. I don't know why at the time. Could I go to Barnes & Noble and buy books? Yes. But I interchange with that. Should I buy a book or should I get one from the library? I waffle back and forth with that. One of them being the amount of space that I have in my house, where to put all these books. Because I have this thing, like, I hate to see books buried. I don't know what it is. I don't like to see them in boxes because I know that they're never going to come back out. And the gift that they were intended to provide are never going to be able to re-gift. So I never want to lay privilege to that waste. And so for some reason, I got Stacey Abrams' book. And it was a precursor to me being in politics, but understanding disenfranchisement and the amount of stuff, let's just say, behind it. A lot of times we think, oh, just go and vote. It's not that simple. And I think Stacey Abrams is the leader in that and helping us understand how things can be manipulated. And so right now, the most influential book I would say would be Stacey Abrams' book. I actually bought that book for other people. I haven't bought it for myself yet. I got it at the library, yeah. It's a very policy-laden book, but what she did was tell the stories and stories from across America of how people do things and manipulate things, redlining, and all of those other things. It is a profound book. It is absolutely profound, and I would recommend anyone who is getting into politics, because what it does is we forget the ballot box. We think it's very simple. We think it's like, oh, you just go to vote. And there's whole industries. There's campaign industries. There's people that are demographics and doing surveys and how could they get elected and the political BS that happens. And all of it is based on the influence of the vote. And you really have to look behind that door. Well, I think the first thing is it's currently standing. I'm hoping that it can be more helpful, but it's behind the downtown library and it's that library box. It's kind of like the Amazon box. And so I actually did that. That was me from my council seat. And that took a lot of influence to happen. And my thoughts are it provides a new and innovative way to get to the community. Now, they put it behind the downtown library because of the piping and all the reconstruction that they needed to do in the library. But the thought process is to get that out in the communities and to bring the library to where people are. That's the legacy, I hope. At City Council and the mayor's office, they say, oh, this is Nick's robot. And so there was almost like a belittling of it, but I think it has the ability to catch on and provide access to a library or to books, have access to information that is outside the brick and mortar construct.
Thank you for listening to 250 Stories, a production of HPL Studios at Hartford Public Library. This episode was written and produced by Christopher T. Brown, sound by Sam Sigmund, edited by Faith Lucas, and with photography and graphic design support from Hartford Public Library's communications team and the Hartford History Center. For more information on this project, visit www.hplstudios.hplct.org. New episodes release every Tuesday, so subscribe to stay tuned.